Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, I've got the fabulous Maria Emmerich with me, and I'm going to ask Maria the same question I ask absolutely everybody. Hey, Maria, why did you become carnivore?
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be here. Um, well, a lot of people probably heard this story, but I think it's very fascinating. I was 16 years old, and it's almost 27 years ago now. So if you want to do the math to figure out how old I am, you can. But I was 16 and I wasn't feeling well. And I went to my family doctor. I didn't even tell my parents I was going. I just went because I really was sick. And at that visit, I was told I had something called PCOS, which we now know is basically a type 2 diabetes that affects female fertility. I was given a prescription drug for my acid reflux because I had it all the time. I was given a drug for depression because I was pretty depressed, and a drug for IBS. At the young age of 16, like 3 prescription drugs. And so I had these in my hand, and I was like, I don't want to take these. And she said it was nothing I was doing wrong. It was the cards I was dealt because I had family members with acid reflux and this and that. So it was just, my body, right? Well, that very same week, I took my beautiful golden retriever to the vet because she was losing patches of her hair. And the first question the vet asked me was, what are you feeding her? And I was like, wow, yeah, what you put in comes out. It shows on the outward appearance. And um, most people know this, but I worked at a coffee shop at that time when I was 16, where before I would go to high school, before school started for the day, I would go to the coffee shop and I would get there at like 4 a.m. to make the scones and the muffins and the cinnamon rolls. And then once school was over, I would go back to the coffee shop. And we would close about 5:30. And whatever didn't sell, I got to go home with. So believe me, I knew what days were going to be very busy and the cinnamon rolls were going to sell. So I would make extra just because I wanted them for dinner. And so I would go home with like boxes of cinnamon rolls and muffins. And, did you ever watch Seinfeld? Probably not. What?
Nothing for you.
The muffin tops, right? Like I just had all the different varieties. It was great. But it wasn't great for my body. And so when you look into what causes PCOS, there wasn't the internet back then, but it's very clear if you do any research that excess caffeine, sugar, and carbohydrates cause PCOS. And I was like, oh man, I have to change all of this stuff. But I didn't want to eat chicken breasts and broccoli. Like that just wasn't, I still don't like that. And so I kind of recreated my favorite things like cinnamon rolls into these exotic carnivore-like foods made with I don't know if you made them with the egg whites and you whip the bread. It's like really great. But I just started creating recipes and that was just for myself. But then before you knew it, like everybody wanted it and they wanted the recipes. And so I went to school for nutrition and exercise physiology because I lost half my body. I felt really great. I wanted to start exercising, which I never wanted to before, but it was all from, those diagnoses of, my prescription drugs I didn't want to take. That's kind of how it started in the long run, in the long story.
What did your family think that when at 16 you had these conditions and you decided that nutrition was the answer? Were they tutting and like, oh, you've got to listen to the doctor and you've got to take these drugs, or were they supportive?
No, they don't listen, so I can tell you the truth. I grew up in Wisconsin, and in Wisconsin, food is it's what you do, especially this time of year. It's very cold, it's very dark all the time, and so you sit around and you eat. And so when I changed that, I was the outsider, and they didn't like me being the outsider, and so they would make my favorite foods to try to tempt me to not. And I think that happens with everybody. When you change your diet, your friends and family are afraid you're going to change and they don't realize you're changing for the better. But they fear that maybe you're going to judge them for what they eat. And I'm not a judgy person. I still don't care what they eat. I'll encourage them, to, if they're sick or whatever. But no, I'm not a judgy person. And no, people are triggered when you change your diet. They really, really are. But I think that just made me, I'm a very stubborn person, and it just made me want to show them that I can do it.
And when you started to get better, look better, feel better, whatever, metric you want to use, did they start to relent and not be so triggered and be supportive? No.
Still, they are very proud of what I've done, but they won't change their life. And it makes me very sad.
Yeah, it makes me very sad. And I think it's really common. I coach a lot of people, and the biggest problems they have is not adapting to this or cooking or anything in particular other than my partner, brother, sister, mum, nurse thinks I'm an idiot and I'm going to kill myself. And it's crazy. It's
I think
crazy.
it's hardest because when I do work with people and they transform their lives, a lot of times their children will transform their lives too, or other people, their extended family, their sisters or brothers, whatever. And that warms my heart so much, but it also makes me really sad that, my family doesn't want to join me, but it's okay. I still love them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that shines through actually. In all the big influencers have at some point dropped into a conversation. Paul Saladino the other day said, "Oh, half of my family never listened to me." You think, well, he's got a lot of followers and he's obviously very intelligent. But and a good example of it. That's the other thing I think is very strange. When someone changes their life, you would think they'd be a bit more interested, but
Well, sadly, my grandmother died of Alzheimer's, and when she was still living, this was maybe 15 years ago, I tried to explain to my parents about, they call it type 3 diabetes. The brain's no longer using glucose, and I really think that we can help her. And I really wanted to do something, but it was just kind of like, brushed off until probably 10 years later. Dr. Oz, do you know who Dr. Oz is? On television said, "Oh, type 3 diabetes is Alzheimer's and this and that." And my mom sent me a text. I was like, like as if I never said it,
yes, I've experienced that as well. It's got to come from them, hasn't it? And it's normally someone on television that they respect. But anyway, at least they're paying attention, so that's good. So you started this quite a long time ago in comparison to a lot of people that are doing keto or low carb or carnivore. At that point, what were you eating and how has that evolved? What have you learned over the last couple of decades?
That's what I like to tell people is what you're eating now is going to be different 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because you learn and you get better. When I first started this, I didn't lose weight right away. But I felt so much better. My depression went away. And I had a few rules. You can not touch gluten anymore. Gluten and grains are gone. So that was a big no-no. And then I cut out fruit because that was just another form of sugar and it brought back that sweet craving. I focused more. I ate a lot of dairy, especially being in Wisconsin, and it wasn't until I cut that out that's when I finally lost weight. And I finally lost weight when I focused on protein rather than focusing on fat because I had enough body fat at that time. I had a lot of body fat, so at that time I could use that for ketosis, and I don't think a lot of people understand that. I need to eat a lot of dietary fat in order to be on this keto diet. It's like, well, no, if you have a lot on your body, you can use that for fuel if you let it. But if you're drinking cups of heavy cream and cheese, it's not going to happen.
So when you say dairy out, I mean, do you include butter in that? Because that's quite popular at the moment to add to steak and stuff.
Yeah, I think that, steak has, depending on what cut you use, steak has a lot of fat on it. And just think about this. Our ancestors that killed the woolly mammoth, did they hold on, everybody, I got to get the butter churner out to put the butter on the woolly mammoth? No, that's just, the animal does have a lot of fat on it. So it's just saying.
And I think that's the gluten out is pretty mainstream. And I think when I have a new client that is really struggling with absolutely everything, I say, look, just take the bread out. Just take that out first and see the difference. prove the concept that it is food that is causing you some problems, and then we'll talk later. So I'm actually quite surprised how similar our opinions are, because that's literally the list I give to people. They'll come back and say, I feel better, a week without bread, been tough, but I feel so good. And so, right, now let's take some dairy out. It's like, great, that's working too. I mean,
we poo-poo gluten, and everybody's gluten-free. We understand that, but dairy is still there a lot of times. And what people don't realize is dairy is a more common allergen than gluten is when you look at the world. And so I like you work with mainly people with autoimmune issues, Hashimoto's, Graves, MS, you name it. And in those cases, dairy's triggering, the antibodies to be present. And once they, get it out and see the results, they're usually okay, but it's the hard part of taking it out. I had a wonderful woman I worked with who had alopecia, and she had no hair whatsoever. And I worked with her, and 6 months later, she had her first haircut in 10 years. Beautiful head of hair. But she loved her ice cream so much that she quit. And now she has no hair again. And it's like, oh man, as a woman, like a hair day can like make it a great day or a bad day, And I feel for her that she wasn't overweight whatsoever. She's very small, but food had her around her finger, It was sad.
did you feel that's just an addiction then, or a sort of, I don't believe it.
It will never be in the dictionary. Food addiction will never, I almost guarantee you, we will never see food addiction in the dictionary, because the majority of people, you and I understand there's a definite addiction, but the majority, they don't see that as an addiction. That's just living,
Yeah. Maybe sugar. What about sugar addiction then? Do you think that?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like look at all the studies. Even like, I understand we're not rats, but those studies are fascinating how they will, the rats could either choose sugar or cocaine, and they always chose sugar, but then they put a shock on the sugar and they said, okay, sugar or cocaine. And they still chose the sugar with the shock. And if you look at what happens to our brain, that dopamine lights up huge, And then over time, that dopamine signal gets downregulated. You get a tolerance to it. So you need more and more and more. Sad.
So I think people like this sort of science side of things as well as the practical side. So your book behind you, for instance, and I spoke to your husband the other week, lovely guy. He said about you writing your first book. Do you include these sort of nuggets in every recipe book, so someone new to you could know what you're saying?
Not all of my books are like, that's not a cookbook. That's a nutritional book. So, but yes, in my cookbooks, the whole front matter is all education to show you how to do it, why you want to do it. But I think the big pieces, I've spoken at a lot of events, which I love too, and these brilliant doctors tell you all the science on why you should eat this way. But even their personal diet is very boring to me. I wouldn't, this is the whole idea of keto or carnivore is not sustainable, because you get bored, you want something different. I look at most, these, very powerful doctors' diets. I'm like, oh, I would not last a week on that. That's so boring. But I want to teach people how to make it delicious and flavorful and packed with umami. You could even, like umami, you can have on a carnivore diet, like fish sauce and all of these things that light up the palate to make you, enjoy the food. I think there's a balance where food becomes your life, or you can enjoy the food. So there's a very definite balance. But I want people to enjoy the food, but just not be consumed where that's all they think about,
And I think carnivore definitely does that for more people than the food industry would like to admit, because they feel satiated. They can't believe how tasty it is. I'm not one of these zero tolerance people. I understand about if you've got an autoimmune condition, it's quite good to eliminate. But, I have a lot of fish. I have a lot of variation of pork, beef and everything. Yeah. Yeah. I know. And I think for people who haven't seen your Instagram, the food always looks amazing, always looks fabulous. So, it's mouth-watering in the way it looks. And obviously, I've tried some of the stuff. So I want to go on to a couple of simple things that you advocate, which is talking about PSMF, so protein sparing modified fasting. Did you discover this, or is this something that came to you, or is it?
So like I told you early on in my journey, I did not lose weight. And so I just called them my pure protein days, where I lowered the fat a lot, and I ate mainly lean proteins. And I didn't do it every day, but I would have like 2 days a week where I would really increase the protein, lower the fat. Carbs were like basically zero. It was a carnivore type diet, right? But a leaner carnivore type diet. So it would be like a filet mignon instead of a ribeye, that type thing. And I finally was like, oh, I'm finally losing weight. There was no dairy allowed. And then I would have one overfeeding day a week. And it's not a Pizza Hut day, but a higher calorie day, like, some short ribs or the ribeye, something like that, where the calories were very high. But 2 days a week, I did protein. They're called pure protein days back then. And so I wrote about that in my first book called Keto Adapted, which is still out there. I never thought people would really read it, but they just loved it. It was a self-published book because it was very personal. I talked about my issues and my PCOS, and it was kind of like a diary. I just put it all out there and all the mistakes I made and how to do it properly. And now someone was like, well, that's not a pure protein day. That's called protein sparing. I'm like, what protein sparing? It sounds like you're eating very little protein, So that's the medical term. I did not come up with it, but it's the same concept. My version of when I work with people is probably a bit different because I know that there's some practitioners that will use like fat-free cottage cheese or whey protein. And I still say no dairy. There's no dairy allowed. Cut it out. So, whatever you want to follow, but that dairy piece is huge. I get people all the time, like, all I did was cut out the dairy. My macros are still the same, but it's finally coming off and I feel so much better. My acid reflux gone. My migraines are gone. I don't think people realize what an allergen, dairy can be.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you were calling it a pure protein day, which is better than protein sparing, because
I should have stuck with it. I know.
Because the protein sparing is talking about sparing your protein on your body, isn't it? Sparing your muscle, but it's a bit nuanced. Yeah. But yeah, well, let's bring it back. I'm going to start talking about pure protein days.
Great ones too.
So let's ask you a couple of questions that I've asked a few people, because there are concerns that come up time and time again. I just wondered if you had a view on it. So a few people talk about protein. They immediately say, what about my kidneys? So is there a concern with kidney health and protein consumption?
No. Unless someone's in like stage 4 kidney disease or they've lost a kidney. Even in stage 4, I've helped people reverse. I just posted a testimony on my Instagram. She reversed her insulin-dependent type 2 diabetes, kidney disease, hypertension, and she got off 7 medications. I just posted that about 30 minutes ago. So you can reverse it, and she's doing a carnivore diet. However, if you only have one kidney, you might want to, back off a little bit. Or if you have cancer, I'd back off on protein. Those are the two situations. Or seizures, epilepsy. However, it's like a muscle. You know how you work your biceps? Protein is like making your kidneys finally work, right? It's making them work harder. So it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And you can reverse kidney disease. And if you think about what's causing kidney disease, it's the carbohydrates and the sugar that we're eating. Like, that's why people need to go on dialysis. It's not because they're eating enough protein. And I know this personally. My grandpa died of type 2 diabetes, had to be on dialysis, and he wasn't going to change his diet. And he wasn't eating a lot of protein. He was eating a lot of carbohydrates.
Yeah. It's strange that the food that didn't put you there is the thing that is off limits. And I too have had a few success stories on my channel talking about reversing kidney disease, and one guy actually got off dialysis. So it can be done, definitely. And there is a science there about it being protective, which I think is interesting. There's also a bit of a thing about iodine at the moment. Have you got any concerns over iodine supplementation, or do you think it's a good thing? What are your views?
I think you just want to make sure that you work with someone that's very knowledgeable on how to add it in, because I do think it's very important. I do work with a lot of people with thyroid issues, and iodine deficiency, especially when, in this community, a lot of people are just eating beef, for the carnivore diet. And then they use Redmond real salt or a sea salt. That's going to be devoid of iodine. So I think, a nice supplementation is good, but you want to work with somebody who's knowledgeable on how to add it in properly.
Yeah, it's funny how we get these things constantly come up every so often. And I've had loads of questions about iodine supplementation. People scared, being told by their doctor that it's dangerous, which I think is strange. Yeah. There's a very old book in the UK that doctors refer to where they literally say in the book that iodine is dangerous to consume.
Oh, no, I think it's really essential. I mean, low iodine is a very common cause of miscarriages in women, iodine deficiency, poor brain development in children, constipation, dry skin, hard time losing weight. I didn't know where you were getting at. I thought maybe like I was overly prescribing iodine, because I do usually ask, like, what's your diet? Are you doing any iodine? That's one of the things I usually recommend to people, but it's usually a drop, and it's, a few drops a day, and you build up to it, and it's nothing dramatic, but I think it's essential, especially when I work with fertility.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a qualified phlebotomist, and I always say if you're having too much iodine, you will urinate it out. We can even prove this. And that's how you test for iodine deficiency. You give somebody, just because we're international, let's say 100 units of iodine, they drink it, and you measure in the urine whether 100 units comes out over 24 hours. And if it does, then you haven't got a deficiency. It's really that simple. I'm going to rifle 3 simple questions to you now. What causes belly fat?
Well, a variety of things could do it, just like drinking heavy cream can do it. It's usually an estrogen dominant. It depends, like when you carry your weight in different places, that apple shape, that's really the dangerous fat, that belly fat is. And I usually, mention, like, when you see a man with a big beer belly, it's not a beer belly, it's an estrogen belly. Because beer and alcohol can cause too much estrogen, and that's where you often store it. And this is why, I work with menopausal women, who's probably my number one clientele. And, getting rid of that is very important. And when I talk about estrogen, most of the time, menopausal women are like, I was told I don't have any estrogen. I'm like, okay, let's back up. There's 3 different types of estrogen. There's one only when you're pregnant, not talking about that. The second one's it comes from our ovaries, and it's very healthy. And we want that. It gives you great skin and, good cardiovascular health, great bones. I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the third toxic estrogen that can come from soy and alcohol, and our environment is filled with these, hormonal issues, scented candles, scent sprays, like all of these things that are in our environment now can really affect your estrogen dominance and affect your fertility, affect how you're dealing with menopause, how, the belly fat is. So yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah, that's a good answer. What about the person that tries this diet and in the first couple of weeks complains of fatigue?
I usually ask, are you taking any electrolytes? Because as you eliminate carbohydrates, along goes all that water loss. And with all that water loss will go all of your energy. You need you need to be hydrated to absorb magnesium, potassium. So if you're getting like leg cramps, you can't just add in magnesium and potassium because you need sodium to absorb them. And this is why when people first start keto or carnivore, they might get headaches or heavy legs walking upstairs. They might cry easy, be depressed. It's low sodium electrolytes, potassium, magnesium. So getting that up there. And some people need a lot more than others. It's dependent on your body. It's dependent on how much liquids you drink in a day. Because the more water you drink, the more electrolytes are going to go. The more active you are, if you sweat, if you're sweating at night, if you have hot flashes, you need more electrolytes. So, cheers.
Yeah. That's a brilliant answer. So I'm going to go into a very controversial area. What about the person that goes on to the carnivore diet or keto and their LDL goes up? What do you tend to say to those people that worry about that?
I would say get a coronary calcium score to see if you have plaque buildup in your arteries. We're in this world that's looking at the wrong thing. We're in this world where doctors get a lot of money. And I was telling my children this. I don't know if it's the same in the UK. In the United States, doctors get a lot of money for putting people on drugs. Is it true for you?
Absolutely. They get what's called an honory. So it isn't like a commission. They say in your practice, if you bring the average LDL down, we will celebrate your success with an honory.
So not necessarily putting the drugs on them, but bringing the numbers down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, how do you do that when you're a doctor?
So, here, I actually had, he was a doctor and he quit. He came to visit me here in Maui to talk about some things. And he said he actually quit because if he saw, 20 patients in a day, and if he didn't give out 7 medications, people were on his case. The pharmaceutical companies were on his case. Like, I think it was the hospital actually, but it was just shocking to me where I've also talked to doctors in China. When they get people off their medications, they're rewarded. That's what it should be. Like, we blame beef for being bad for the environment. You know what's really bad for the environment? The pharmaceutical companies, all their pollution. Probably going to get a little kickback hit for that. I don't know. But it's true. And I don't know where I was going with that. What was your question again?
Basically about LDL.
Oh, LDL. So yeah, looking at your like a CAC score. Now, some doctors will say, "Oh, you don't want that radiation. If you go on an airplane, you're going to get more radiation than this. Don't let them scare you into not doing it." I had a wonderful client, and she was in her 60s. Her husband was a heart surgeon, and she had very high cholesterol. He, however, had very low cholesterol, and he would kind of tease her, "Oh, you're eating all the, the eggs, and you're getting your bad cholesterol," because she was keto with me. And he was eating a lot of oatmeal and the typical healthy type heart diet. And we said, well, let's prove him wrong. Why don't you get a CAC score? And so she did. And it was 0. You want it to be as close to 0 as possible. It means that you have no plaque buildup. And he's like, okay, I'm going to get one. His was in the 400s. And so it wasn't even on his radar what a CAC score was, because you're just trained differently. We're trained to look at cholesterol. And what's interesting is cholesterol makes healthy hormones. So if you are dealing with like a hormone imbalance, your cholesterol is usually high. So this is why women who go through menopause, their cholesterol is going to go up. And their doctor's like, oh, you need to go on a statin. Your cholesterol just jumped like 100 points. And they think, oh, the statin will help that. But in reality, your cholesterol is trying to get your ovaries to talk again, and they're just not going to. It's not a bad thing that your cholesterol is high. It's like the firefighter trying to protect you. Let's not kill the firefighters. Let's kill the inflammation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to the CAC score, my wife's was a big fat 0. And I did that when I first realised that carbs were bad for me. So that was 10 years ago when I was 50, just coming up to 50. I'm 60 in May, and I'm going to have another CAC. Well, 50, I'd been the poster boy for the guidelines. Basically, never smoked, never drunk. I did low fat, skim milk, porridge, freshly squeezed orange juice. I was an advanced personal trainer, and my CAC was 639. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really bad. I mean, I'm nearly up with Bill Clinton, who was about 1,000 when he had his triple bypass. But my wife, which is my second wife, when I first met her, which was around the age of 50, we went out for breakfast. Our first date was a breakfast, and she tucked in to bacon and eggs. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is before I realised about the carbs. And I'm sitting there thinking, how does she look so good? How does she look so good? She's stuffing all this, and I was thinking I was being healthy. Anyway, I've gone off the thing. Talking about
love stories.
Yeah, it's cool. Also, with the doctors, they have a thing called standard duty of care, which I think is the same in the States. If a certain number is reached on a certain blood, they have to recommend a certain medication. So I suppose there is a push. So you get to a certain age, just age, nothing else. They will recommend a statin at that age, which is ridiculous. No clinical problems. They'll just give you a medication recommendation. What are your views then? So we talked about sort of mimicking fasting. What about fasting? Do you agree with advanced fasting or water fasting, dry fasting, anything?
So I like to use protein sparing modified fasting as a tool instead of extended water fasting, because you can look at any study, you will lose muscle when you do those. And what's really scary is once you start feeding again, even if you supplement with leucine, which is that really important amino acid to trigger muscle protein synthesis, you have a lag. You will not start building muscle for many, many days after you did a water fast. And so I suffered from a lot of muscle loss for a variety of reasons. I know how hard it is to build. I know that there's something called sarcopenia of aging, and that's where you lose quite a bit of muscle as you age. That leucine shift is higher as you age. You need more protein. And it's really hard to build muscle as you age. So not losing the muscle, like nobody should want to lose that. And that's just why instead of a water fast, I like to do a protein sparing modified fast, which is very low in calorie, but you get enough protein to hold on to that muscle, and you only lose body fat. And let me tell you, the testimonies of my clients and everything is fantastic. I actually I run on the beach in the morning, and I usually go before it's light out. I like to run in the dark. And this woman, she's like, "Is that you, Maria Emmerich?" And I was like, oh boy. I mean, I was all sweaty, and she's like, "No, Maria, I mean, she was so excited to meet me. It was very sweet. She said, "Maria, I used to do extended fasting, and I was diagnosed with osteopenia." And that's where you're starting to have bone loss. And if you think about it, your bones are made up of protein. So if you're losing muscle, you're going to lose bone loss too. And people, they're only looking at the scale. So like, oh, this is great. I lost 10 pounds or 20 pounds, however many pounds. But a lot of it's muscle and bone. Those are two things you do not want to lose. And she said, "No, Maria, I switched to your protein sparing modified fast method." And she lost like 100 pounds. She had she reversed her osteopenia. And it's just, I don't think we're addressing what's really going on when we fast. And I'm not saying that you don't, if I have someone suffering from cancer or a terrible disease, okay, maybe an extended fast to help purge some of those cells. But we talk about this, autophagy. You know what the best way to have autophagy is exercise. So why not exercise and eat a steak afterwards? And boom, like you're going to get all the benefit and you get to eat.
It makes total sense. So what is your day then? How long do you run for? And what do you eat? Do you do 2 meals a day in general?
No, we can talk about the mean social media people, but I've changed I don't run as much anymore. I just love it. My mind, I have some of my best ideas when I'm out there running. And in the dark, I'm not distracted by people talking to me or whatever. So I like to go in the dark, running the beach. Nobody's out there, and I feel safe. But I don't run as much anymore. So it used to be an hour. I used to run marathons, so I was running 2 hours a day. Now it's 30 to 40 minutes, but then I also do 20 minutes of weight training. So getting back into weight training, which I really love. Again, I do it in the dark before anybody's awake. It's the first thing I do in the morning. And I can take constructive criticism. So lately, people were in the past, they were saying, oh, you're skin and bones, this and that. And I don't know if Craig got into his illnesses. He got very sick with Lyme disease and ankylosing spondylitis. And we adopted 2 children. Like, I was just putting all of my energy into helping. That's what I do. I'm a helper, right? And so maybe I wasn't taking enough care of myself. So I lost a lot of muscle mass, but now I started lifting weights again. And yeah, I think social media can be cruel that way, but it also opened up my eyes to, okay, I need to stop running as much and get back into the gym to build muscle.
So they were simply saying that maybe they were worried about you. I know there's mean people, but,
Yeah, but, again, I can take constructive criticism that are worried about me. They say it in a nice way, but then, there's you're the anorexic chef and, that type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, when you moved your arm, I could see a very nice looking bicep just now. So that's pretty good. And I often use marathon runners and sprinters as examples when I'm talking about how people can be really healthy and look very different. And, a marathon runner will look to some people like they need a good meal, and yet they've just run 26 miles faster than that person would ever do, in a million years. And a sprinter just looks completely different,
Yeah, that's what my sister, she always says. She's like, I usually talk to my sister when I'm running in the morning. She's like, Maria, you're not even panting and you're running at full speed. She's like, if there was something wrong with you, you wouldn't be able to do that. And your hair wouldn't be as beautiful. She's a great one to talk to because it does hurt when people say that. It makes me very sad.
Yeah, and I think I'm new to this. I haven't been doing the social media as long as you, but my interviews are getting sort of attention, and with that comes the odd remark, which actually caught me unawares. And I'm not nasty. I'm quite nice. I never swear. I never get into arguments. I'm not disrespectful to any other diet. We'll have a little bit of banter, but I'm a specialist in obesity and diabetes, and I was talking about the HbA1c being a poor marker when you're carnivore, because you have to factor in the life of red blood cells, which you can prove live longer with an actual test, a reticulocyte test. So you have to look at your blood glucose, fasted blood glucose, your insulin, C-peptide. There's loads of things, but don't get too worried about the HbA1c because that can be misleading. I went into all the science.
A little bit higher.
Yeah. It could go a little bit higher.
Living long.
Yeah, that's it. Simple. Right. You've got it straight away. I had a comment saying, so you're happy to help people die, are you? And I'm like, how did you get to that? From this very science-based, referenced talk, about 20 minutes. But anyway, I'll point that to one side because that's nothing to do with this interview.
But they feel very safe behind their computer, knocking you off your pedestal.
And I'm only doing it because I want people to be healthy. Like you said, doctors are looking at the wrong thing. Well, sadly, people are looking at the wrong thing, or they're listening to the wrong people, because the mainstream media just will not talk about carnivore in a sensible way. Even when it's a good story, they'll use words like the bizarre diet, the fad diet, and plant things in your mind, even though you're reading about someone who's done the quickest trip up a mountain ever, broken records, but they've got this bizarre carnivore diet. Well, no, they've got this diet and they're very successful. Just say no.
If that person was a vegan, they would proudly say that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's very frustrating. Well, look, Maria, I've taken up a lot of your time and I really do appreciate it. I'm going to ask you one final question, really. People often say to me, right, what are the best sources of protein? So if you could pick 4 or 5 different things, I know you said you don't do chicken much, but 4 or 5 things that you would say someone, go out and buy these things to start eating properly, what would you say?
Well, I do want people to understand there's different rates of absorption when it comes to eggs versus beef versus soy versus, plant-based proteins and how you absorb it and things like that. So I would say, I love eggs because they're cheap. The rate of absorption is different than beef. But I love eggs for the choline and all of that. They're cheap and there's so many different ways to make them fun and interesting. And my favorite food is, steak. I love filet mignon. It's my favorite. But whatever it is, I didn't always love steak. I was more of a ground beef type person. I was more of a child when when I first started. But so I would say ground beef, steak if you can do steak. It doesn't have to be expensive, especially if you do the leaner beef. The toxins are stored in the fat. So, and eggs, if you want to buy anything organic, I would pick eggs and poultry. But I would say like the 5 things, I just want to make sure that you like them. So if you don't like, eggs, pick poultry and beef and all of that. I know I'm not really answering your question, but I would say, fill your fridge with eggs and steak and maybe some chicken if you like chicken. I'm not a big poultry fan. I don't know.
I didn't mean to. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But what about fish? Do you include fish in your diet?
What am I thinking? Yes, I have fish every single day. I love fish for a variety of reasons. I think they're just filled with a bunch of nutrients. The smaller the fish, the less toxins there'll be. So get your sardines on or whatever. But no, I love seafood in general, really a lot.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Your support means the absolute world to me. And if you're enjoying this show, I've got a small favour to ask you. I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider becoming a supporter and make a small monthly donation. Your contribution will really help to improve the show. I'll be able to improve the software, maybe put a few more episodes out, and do many things that I'm hoping to do in the future. Do them a lot quicker. So, it's a small monthly contribution. You can cancel at any time, and the link is in the show notes. Thanks very much for listening.